Now to an update on a story we've been following closely here on Making the Case. Pervis Payne has spent 30 years living on death row. Then last month, his death sentence was vacated. Now a judge is deciding whether he'll ever be able to walk out of prison a free man. Here to discuss is his attorney, veteran death penalty lawyer Kelley Henry. Kelley, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
We've talked a lot about Pervis's case. He has an intellectual disability, but was sentenced to death anyway after being convicted of a double murder back in 1987. But recently, that death sentence was tossed out after his execution was ruled unconstitutional, which gets us to where we are now. So the question is, will Pervis ever see the light of day as a free man? Where does this case stand on that issue?
We were very grateful that the judge gave us an opportunity to argue that Pervis should receive concurrent sentences. We had a hearing in Memphis last week. It was 2 days. We presented 19 witnesses. The issue for the judge, unfortunately, is not whether or not Pervis is innocent or guilty. She cannot address innocence claims in this particular hearing. But she can choose to run his convictions concurrently. That's at the same time. And if she chooses to do that, then Pervis would have an opportunity to be paroled in about 6 years. If she rules against us and does what the state asks, he would not be eligible for parole until he's 85.
So consecutive or concurrent life sentences, for our non-lawyers at home, can you explain the difference between the two and how it impacts Pervis?
Certainly. So because he was sentenced in 1987, Pervis is not eligible for a life without parole sentence. So he is only eligible, he can get life imprisonment. And under Tennessee law, that means that you have to serve 30 years in prison before you could go before a parole board. He also has a conviction that has a 30-year sentence for aggravated assault. So there are essentially 3 charges, and the judge can decide to run those back to back to back. So he would have to be paroled from one sentence before he could start serving the next sentence, be paroled from that before he served the next. And the way the law works, basically that is an effective life without parole if she decides to run them consecutively. That's what the state is asking for. What we're asking for is concurrent life sentences to run at the same time. And the argument is, under the law in the state of Tennessee, the presumption is in favor of concurrent sentencing. And the state has to prove that Pervis would be a threat, that he would be a danger to society. So what we were able to do at our hearing was present these witnesses, both who knew him before the offense and after he's been incarcerated, to give the judge a sense of who Pervis is as a person. And I will give you just one example. We presented a prison officer, a correctional officer, who had been assaulted by another inmate. He had been cut and ultimately received 57 stitches for his injury. Pervis, at some risk to himself, immediately went to the aid of this officer. He and another inmate helped the officer to put, to wrap the wound in a towel. And then Pervis comforted him, this officer, for 11 minutes until medical arrived to take him out of the prison into the hospital. And this officer said to the judge, I will always speak for Pervis Payne. He is a good man. So that's just one of the 19 witnesses that we presented to the judge to convince her that, if Pervis were to be granted parole, that he would have a place in the world to live, that he would be safe, and that he would actually be a productive member of our community.
Wow, that had to be very powerful testimony, especially coming from law enforcement. Now, Kelley, the judge's decision is based on evidence presented during a resentencing hearing, which you were present for. How did that hearing go, and do you know when the judge could issue her ruling?
So the hearing, the proof came in really well as far as, from our perspective. The judge heard from, like I said, 19 witnesses. Not only did she hear from that corrections officer that I spoke of, but also she heard from the warden of the prison, who has 38 years experience in correction. She heard from the associate warden for security, who's in charge of making sure that the prison is safe and secure, and also another warden who's in charge of programs. All of those wardens testified that Pervis is a model inmate, had never been in trouble, and but for his status as having been sentenced to death row, he would be eligible for the lowest level of security and will be moved to the lowest level of security in the prison once the judge issues her order. But besides those witnesses, we called volunteers from the community, some very conservative folks who are involved in prison ministry, who have gotten to know Pervis through that work. There's a group called Men of Valor, and they are a not-for-profit organization who come into the prison and work with inmates and help them acclimate to society. They have these amazing programs, these job training programs, halfway houses. They've gotten to know Pervis, and they have talked about his heart, his spirituality, how they would welcome him into their program. One of them even said, he's welcome in my home. We presented Purvis's family, other people from the Church of God in Christ, who Purvis's dad is a superintendent in the Kojic Church. So they all testified and painted the picture of Pervis, who we all know is a person who just wanted to help other people. The judge's decision, her ruling, she said she would enter no later than January 24th. It could be before then, but that's when we're scheduled to go back to court.
So the law is on your side. You had more than 19 witnesses testify on behalf of Pervis Payne. So the likelihood that the judge, rules in favor of concurrent sentencing is pretty high, you'd say.
I never want to make those kind of predictions. I feel really good about our case. I feel really good about the law. The judge said that it was a tough decision for her. She listened to both sides. The victim's family testified and gave very moving testimony. They obviously have been through a lot. From my perspective, I think the judicial system has lied to them for 34 years. But they are still suffering, and that suffering is something that the judge has to take into consideration, wanted to take into consideration, and she's going to issue her decision. And the thing that we always say in Pervis's case is, we're not done. This is the next step in the journey for Pervis. The law, because the system is as broken as it is, does not allow me to get into court right now for Pervis to prove his innocence. That is something that is very frustrating to us. And so we are continuing to focus on the clemency process as well. Certainly, we want the judge to give him concurrent sentences. We want him to have that chance at parole, but that's just a chance. The parole board can say no. But we want him to have that opportunity, obviously. But we are still putting our eyes on the clemency process and trying to prove Pervis's innocence through the governor and executive clemency, because unfortunately the courts are just broken and they can't, there's no procedural path to hear our proof.
Well, Kelley, how does Pervis feel? I mean, how's he doing? How's his spirit through all of this?
Pervis is just amazing. He is one of the most grateful clients I've ever had. He believes his faith is so strong that he believes that whatever is going to happen, God will take care of it. And, he wants to come home. He wants to be able to see his dad. We had some people who came in to testify who work with a prison program that deals with dispute resolution and mediation, that Pervis has joined their group. And one of those women talked about how Pervis wants to be out to help his dad, because his dad is 79 years old. He has Parkinson's, and he could use Pervis's help. But his spirit is so strong and so encouraging. Every time I speak to him, he makes me feel better. It's just a gift to be his lawyer.
Well, I hope that the next time we see you, that you'll have some good news to share. Attorney Kelley Henry, thank you again so much for your time.